Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a fascinating source, something really interesting, and we pull out the crucial knowledge, the key insights directly for you.
Yeah, making it easy to get the good stuff.
Exactly. And today, that source is excerpts from General Jim Mattis's book, Call Sign Chaos: Learning to Lead. This was actually a suggestion from you, our listener.
And it's a really great one. I mean, this book, it's not just, a standard memoir. It's like decades of leadership distilled.
Right, from when he was a young Marine.
All the way up, four-star general, Secretary of Defense, that kind of sustained experience. It just offers some really powerful lessons.
Totally. So our goal, our mission for this deep dive is to pull out those key leadership principles, the thinking that really shaped his career.
Yeah, understand what made him tick, leadership-wise.
And give you, the listener, a real understanding, some valuable takeaways you might be able to apply. Doesn't matter what field you're in.
Makes sense.
Okay, so let's get into it. A good starting point, I think, is his core values, the sort of bedrock of his service. He talks about this idea: politics ends at the water's edge.
Mhm.
What do you think is really significant about that?
Well, it really highlights this deep commitment, doesn't it, to the mission itself, like above politics.
Yeah.
He really emphasizes serving the country, whether it was a Democrat or a Republican in the White House. It didn't matter to his core duty.
So for the listener, that kind of points to focusing on the bigger goals, right? Even if leadership changes or priorities shift around you.
Exactly, prioritizing that larger purpose. And it's crystal clear that the Marine Corps was huge in instilling those values right from the start.
Oh, absolutely. He describes it almost like year after year. It wasn't just tactical stuff.
No, it was fundamental in education, in how to think, how to adapt, how to operate when things go sideways, which they always do.
Building that deep ethos.
That's the word, ethos.
But what's kind of interesting is, within that super disciplined structure, the Marines, he found something maybe a bit unexpected.
He did, yeah. He noticed that the Corps actually cultivated mavericks, original thinkers.
Right, which seems counterintuitive.
It does. But,
Mm.
for you listening, that's a key insight. Even in really structured places, there's often room, maybe even a need, for intellectual freedom, for different ways to solve problems. They valued critical thinking alongside the standards.
So it wasn't just follow the manual thinking.
Precisely. Yeah, they had doctrine, obviously, learned the hard way often.
Right.
But they weren't dogmatic about it. He even mentions just citing doctrine in an after-action review without real analysis. That was frowned upon. It was about learning from what happened, not just memorizing rules.
Right.
That critical reflection piece is valuable anywhere.
Which really connects to another big theme, doesn't it? This idea of continuous learning, adapting.
Yeah.
Something the Marines clearly hammered home.
Oh, absolutely. And for Mattis, a huge piece of that learning was studying history, deeply studying it.
He makes that distinction, right, between just reading and really studying history. What did that mean for him?
Well, studying wasn't just knowing dates and names. For him, it was like immersing yourself in the context, understanding the motivations, analyzing the successes, sure, but really digging into the failures.
Failures, yeah.
He felt it was, frankly, foolish, maybe even unethical as a leader, not to use that massive library of experience from warriors, thinkers throughout history.
So the principle for the listener is don't just consume info.
Yeah.
Engage with it, analyze it, draw lessons you can actually use.
Exactly. That line he has about a commander who hasn't read hundreds of books being functionally illiterate, that shows how much he valued intellectual depth alongside the practical skills. It wasn't an either.
And it wasn't passive learning either. He talks about that culture of blunt feedback in the Corps, constructive criticism.
Right. Personal feelings weren't the priority. It was about getting better, finding what worked best, even if it, ruffled some feathers or went against the grain.
That raises an interesting question, though. What about before the military? Did his earlier life shape him for this kind of learning, this leadership? We often think it's all forged in the service itself.
That's a great point. And yeah, even as a kid, he apparently had this adventurous streak, hitchhiking pretty young.
Really?
Yeah, wanted to see things, experience stuff firsthand. It kind of bred curiosity, self-reliance. So for you listening, it shows how those seemingly random early experiences can actually build foundational stuff for leadership later on.
And there was that really intense moment he writes about, falling on an icy ridge. That sounded pretty serious.
Well, yeah, near-death experience.
Yeah.
And the impact, huge. It brought home this realization, okay, we don't control when or how we die, but we absolutely choose how we face it.
Wow.
and maybe more importantly, how we live up until that point.
Yeah.
It made him want to be around people who, embraced life, tackled challenges head on, didn't just complain.
Like a metaphor for the Marines almost. You fall, you get up, you deal.
He saw it that way, yeah. Face setbacks, deal with them.
Hmm.
And there was another encounter too, right? With someone in jail.
Yes. That was surprising. This inmate told him something really simple but profound. You can look at stars or mud.
Stars or mud?
And for Mattis, the takeaway was the power of choice, how we respond to our circumstances. We can't always control what hits us, but we always, always control our reaction, where we put our focus. That's a huge resilience lesson for anyone.
Definitely. Okay, so transitioning into his actual military career,
Yeah.
what were some of those first big lessons as a junior officer, stepping into that world?
Well, one of the first things was joining this really experienced infantry unit in Okinawa. He felt lucky, actually, to be surrounded by leaders who'd seen combat.
Ah, the veterans?
Yeah. They were demanding, he said, but supportive. They shared what they knew, but made it clear. His success was on him, his effort, his competence.
And in that environment, he figured out pretty quick that building a solid professional reputation was key. What did that look like for him?
Correct. It boiled down to, well, being fit, capable, showing tactical sense, knowing how to direct fire effectively, being adaptable when things change fast, leading his platoon well, and just setting that example constantly.
So not about where he went to school or anything.
Nope. Their respect was earned through demonstrated ability, toughness. So for you listening, it really hits home that idea of competence and leading by example. That's how you build credibility.
He also tells that story early on, dealing with a Marine who just wasn't cutting it, and how a senior NCO handled it. What was the lesson there?
Yeah, the first sergeant dealt with it decisively. An expeditious discharge, Mattis called it. It showed him the Marine Corps' absolute commitment to its standards, no messing around. It hammered home that sometimes you have to make those tough calls, take decisive action to keep the whole unit effective and cohesive. It's a hard lesson about accountability, really, in any organization.
Okay, let's pivot a bit to the fundamentals. Combat leadership. What were some of his core beliefs there?
Well, he really emphasizes fire and maneuver, that it's timeless in warfare.
Okay, break that down a bit. Fire and maneuver.
So think of it as combining, suppressive force, the fire, with strategic movement, the maneuver, to gain an advantage. It's fundamental.
Got it.
But in a broader sense, for you listening, it highlights needing both the right resources, the firepower, whatever that is in your context, and using them smartly, strategically, to reach your goals. He also really believed the Corps' whole purpose was winning battles, and you couldn't separate that from instilling those core values in every single Marine.
He also talks about clear goals and coaching, right? From his time running a recruiting station. That seems like a different kind of leadership challenge.
Totally different. And that assignment, it taught him persuasive leadership, how to motivate people, guide them, even if they were maybe reluctant at first, towards a shared goal.
Right, because recruiters aren't exactly commanding troops in the same way.
Exactly. He learned, you got to set high expectations, but also give people the support, the resources they need to actually hit those marks. Super valuable insight for leading any diverse team.
And he knew that leadership wasn't one size fits all, especially with his own subordinate commanders.
Yeah, he really stresses knowing the individuals, their strengths, even their weaknesses, and matching them to the right tasks. He gives examples like, this company commander was great for this kind of mission, but maybe another one was better suited for something else.
So tailoring the approach.
Exactly, that personalized aspect of leading effectively.
So as he moved up, higher command, bigger responsibilities.
Yeah.
What were some key lessons then?
Well, there was an early, pretty impactful one. His battalion almost missed the start of the Gulf War because they were off on this long training exercise.
Ouch.
Yeah. He got what he called a blunt education from his boss, Colonel Fulford, about how crucial it is to stay plugged into what higher headquarters needs, what they're thinking. You can't get caught flat-footed.
So always be aware of the bigger picture, the organizational context.
Right. Leaders are expected to be vigilant, ready. You can't just be focused on your own little world.
And Colonel Fulford's influence went beyond just that incident, didn't it?
Oh, definitely. Mattis really took to heart Fulford's way of using mission-type orders.
Okay, explain that. Mission-type orders.
It means you give your subordinates the objective, the what and the why, really clearly, but you let them figure out the how.
Empowering them.
Exactly. It builds initiative, trust. Mattis learned to rehearse like crazy, make sure everyone understood the overall plan, the intent, without needing step-by-step instructions all the time.
He also really focused on preparing troops for the shock of actual combat, right? How did he do that?
He was a huge believer in making training hard, as realistic and demanding as possible. The goal was to make effective responses almost like muscle memory, instinctive.
So it kicks in under stress.
Precisely. Continuous, varied training, building deep trust within the unit, all crucial.
And clear communication under fire, another big one for him.
Yes, he had them do constant radio drills. Platoon sergeants, commanders, practicing clear, concise orders under simulated chaos. Because garbled, panic comms, that gets people killed.
Absolutely. A lesson for any high-stakes situation, really.
Yeah.
Clear communication is key.
Totally. He even came up with this unique role. The Juliet officers, what was their job?
Yeah, these were hand-picked officers who knew his battle plan, his intent, inside and out. Their job was to move between the different units out there.
Like roving representatives?
Kind of. Keep him informed on what was really happening on the ground, but also act as that human link back to his command philosophy, making sure everyone stayed aligned even when spread out.
That's clever. But beyond the tactics, the operations, Mattis had this deep sense of the human side of war, the moral side.
Yeah, that comes through really strongly. It's critical to understanding his leadership. He knew, fundamentally, that even winning, it comes at a terrible cost. Victory is salted with tragedy, as he put it.
Wow. Salted with tragedy.
Yeah. And he quotes Napoleon's maxim, "The moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1."
Meaning?
Meaning those intangible things, morale, confidence, trust, the will to fight, they're often way more important than just numbers or equipment in deciding who wins.
And he kept that personal reminder, right? The card on his desk.
Yes, that handwritten card in the Pentagon. Just asking that start question, will this commitment contribute sufficiently to the well-being of the American people to justify putting our troops in a position to die?
That really puts it in perspective, the weight of those decisions.
It does. And for
Right.
you listening, it really highlights those ethical underpinnings that should be part of any big decision you make, whatever your field.
He also showed real commitment to his troops after the fighting, didn't he? With the awards after the Gulf War. Even when it might have been risky for his career.
He did. He got worried that his Marines weren't getting the individual recognition they deserved. And even though a senior officer basically told him to let it go,
He pushed back.
he pushed hard. Advocated strongly to make sure they got the commendations they'd earned. It shows that a leader's job includes championing their people, looking out for them.
Then came the post-Gulf War drawdown. Big personnel cuts. That must have been tough.
Yeah, he was involved in assigning roles, approving who stayed, who had to go, overseeing a big downsizing of the Corps. He felt that weight, having to let go of dedicated Marines. He talks about that social contract, between the military and the people who serve.
Yeah, that implicit promise. Let's circle back to something you mentioned earlier, reading. That seems like such a constant thread for him.
Oh, it's huge. He saw reading not just as nice to have, but as a professional necessity, a privilege, really, an invaluable resource passed down.
He really believed that if you weren't reading seriously as a commander, you were basically incompetent.
That's pretty much his take, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He argued personal experience alone is just too narrow. You have to learn from others. So for you listening, it just reinforces that idea. Lifelong learning isn't just a buzzword. It's crucial for growth, for effective leadership, period.
And it wasn't just him, right? The Marine Corps actually builds this in.
Absolutely. They have mandatory reading lists for every rank. It fosters that culture of intellectual growth, exposure to different perspectives. Mattis himself drew on everyone from Roman leaders to Grant and Sherman to, Sun Tzu, using history to tackle today's problems.
Okay, so as he moved into those higher command roles, bigger scope, less face-to-face time with individual Marines, how did his leadership style have to change?
Well, he recognized he couldn't lead by direct contact anymore, not with everyone. His direction was going through layers of officers, staff, and he had to fight that temptation to micromanage.
Especially with new tech, instant comms.
Exactly. It's so easy to jump in. But he knew that could stifle initiative. So for you listening, as your own responsibilities grow, it highlights that need to delegate effectively, to really trust your team.
He saw the danger in making subordinate commanders feel like they needed permission for every little thing.
Precisely. He believes success, especially on a fluid battlefield, depends on empowering those junior leaders to act decisively. His goal was to unleash that proactive mindset.
Guided by that commander's intent, that concept seems central.
Totally central. He felt that if even a corporal on the front line couldn't explain the commander's intent, the big picture goal, then leadership had failed.
So everyone needs to know a why.
Yes, if they know the ultimate objective, they can make smart decisions, take the right actions within those guidelines, even when things change unexpectedly.
He even referenced Viscount Slim, right, the British commander.
Yeah, Slim's philosophy really resonated with him, this idea of subordinate commanders acting independently but within that larger strategic intent, giving them latitude. It fosters flexibility, decisive action, a great principle for empowering any team.
And he actually tested this out, didn't he, in that training exercise?
He did. He deliberately erased the boundary lines between his battalions on the map for an exercise.
Really? What happened?
It forced them to coordinate more, collaborate directly. He saw his lieutenant colonels talking to each other, figuring things out, without him having to orchestrate everything. It showed the power of decentralized authority when everyone shares the same goal. And apparently that experience helped lead to his call sign.
Chaos.
Chaos. Makes sense now, right?
It does. Okay, let's shift gears to Afghanistan after 9/11. A completely different challenge. What was his initial thinking there?
He saw it as a pivotal moment, a special moment, echoing Churchill. He felt weirdly prepared, partly because of insights from Vietnam vets. His point was, you master your profession so you're ready when opportunity or crisis knocks.
Preparation meeting opportunity.
Exactly. And for you listening, it just underscores that need for continuous preparation, being ready to act.
He wasn't afraid to bend the rules, doctrinally speaking.
Not at all. That famous quip, right? Doctrine is the last refuge of the unimaginative.
Huh. I like that.
Yeah. Doctrine is a guide, a framework, but not chains. You have to adapt, improvise, overcome, whatever it takes to achieve the intent.
Getting access to Afghanistan was tricky, though. Ambassador Wendy Chamberlain played a big role.
Huge role. Her diplomacy, getting his overflight rights through Pakistan quickly, critical early win. It really shows how diplomacy and military action can, and often must, work hand in hand. That interdisciplinary collaboration is powerful.
The initial force that went in was pretty small, lean. How did he manage that?
He used this skip echelon staffing idea, something he'd picked up from an Iraqi major back in the Gulf War.
Skip echelon.
Yeah, basically cutting out layers of command, making the team much leaner, more responsive. For you listening, it's a neat lesson in organizational efficiency, cutting bureaucracy.
And his leadership style there, it was about balancing a clear vision with decentralized action.
Pretty much. Centralized vision, decentralized planning and execution. He focused on the big strategic goals, trusted his staff to figure out the how on the ground, but demanded good feedback loops. That mantra again. What do I know? Who needs to know? Have I told them?
He even drew parallels to amphibious landings, which seems odd for landlocked Afghanistan.
It does seem odd, but he used it as a framework. Contrasting Gallipoli, the disaster, with successful WWII landings. He was highlighting the Marines' core skill. Projecting power ashore, even if ashore in this case meant deep inland, adapting those principles.
There was that funny incident early on. His enthusiastic communication got him a gentle tap on the wrist.
Yeah. He told reporters, we now own a piece of Afghanistan and are going to give it back to the Afghan people. Central Command got a little nervous. Rumsfeld, at a press conference, basically said, don't do that again, but called him clearly exuberant. A good reminder about clearer comms up the chain, even with good intentions.
Okay, so then the focus shifts again massively to Iraq. What was his take leading up to that invasion?
He actually admits he was surprised by the decision to invade Iraq, especially given the sort of strategic advantage the U.S. had with Iraq and Iran being enemies.
Right, the enemy of my enemy.
Exactly. But once the decision was made, his focus immediately snapped to, okay, how do we get the troops ready? Maximum preparation for the mission ahead.
And those warnings from other generals, Xenophon Hogi, Zinni, about the aftermath, controlling Iraq post-invasion, they resonated with him.
They did. Their insights really highlighted how complex it would be, removing Saddam and the mass responsibility for security governance that would follow. Though initially the message they got was that the Marines would probably move on pretty quickly after the main fighting.
Which didn't quite happen, and again, history was his prep tool.
Oh yeah, big time. He dove into books about past campaigns in Iraq, the Siege, T. Lawrence, Gertrude Bell bios, even looked at Alexander the Great's campaigns through Mesopotamia, Sherman's March, searching for parallels, lessons learned.
And he used that sand table exercise to plan with the Allies? That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, a huge sand table out in the Kuwaiti desert, brought together commanders, key staff, Army, Air Force, Marines, Navy, CIA, the Brits, everyone visualizing the plan together, spotting potential problems beforehand. Great example of shared visualization for complex projects.
That letter he wrote to his troops before the invasion, it sounds like it had a real impact.
It did. It wasn't just orders. It was about the values they represented, the importance of the mission, setting that ethical tone, building confidence. He says many Marines kept it. That tells you something.
The initial push into Iraq was fast, and he credits that decentralized decision-making again.
He does. He deliberately gave few explicit orders down low, empowered those assault leaders to make calls on the spot as things unfolded. That initiative, that flexibility at the sharp end, was really effective against the initial resistance.
But then they got stopped, orders from higher up.
Yeah, they received orders to halt. The rationale from higher command was concerned that they were hitting tougher Fedayeen resistance than expected, and worries about logistics keeping up with the speed.
But Mattis disagreed.
He questioned it, yeah. He felt they had momentum, should have kept pushing towards Baghdad. One of those classic friction points in war, right? Different perspectives at different levels.
He also understood the sheer exhaustion of combat, didn't he?
Absolutely. He compared infantry fighting to a marathon. Even the best troops need rest, recovery. Otherwise, exhaustion leads to mistakes, tactical errors, maybe even ethical lapses. Important lesson for managing stress in any tough environment.
And he made that really tough call to relieve a regimental commander early on. Why?
He felt that one unit, Regimental Combat Team 1, just wasn't moving fast enough, wasn't aggressive enough, and he believed that was putting the whole plan, supporting the Army's push on Baghdad, at risk.
So he replaced him.
He did. Put Colonel John Tulin in charge to maintain that momentum. A really difficult decision, but highlights the high stakes and tough personnel calls leaders sometimes have to make.
And the human cost was immediate. He talks about losing young Marines right at the start.
Yeah, those early losses, Corporal Medell and Lance Corporal of Viles. He writes about the profound impact, feeling that weight of responsibility for their lives, recognizing their ultimate sacrifice, really underscores that human dimension of leadership.
And ethical conduct remained paramount, even in the chaos.
Always. He shares that example of a squad leader refusing to fire on a building because women and children were inside. That's the no better friend, no worse enemy ethos in action, even under extreme pressure. Upholding values matters.
Even as they advanced, he was looking for nonviolent ways to keep the peace.
Yeah, in places like Baghdad and Najaf, trying alternative strategies. Like, he mentions contracting bus companies to basically disrupt potential protests led by Muqtada al-Sadr, trying to de-escalate without firing a shot.
Okay, so the invasion phase ends, occupation begins. Whole new set of problems. Fallujah, the first battle, that was intense. What led up to it?
Yeah, things in Fallujah were going downhill fast. More violence, clear warnings, trouble was brewing, and then the brutal killing and mutilation of those 4 American contractors. That was the spark. A response was unavoidable.
How did he approach it initially, and how did that change?
Well, there was a lot of back and forth about how to respond. Mattis opted for a phased approach at first cordon and search, targeting specific individuals, trying not to alienate the whole city.
Trying to be surgical.
Right. But the resistance was fierce, determined. So his guidance shifted. It became kill or capture, anyone actively fighting them. It was close quarters, nasty fighting.
And it stretched resources thin.
Hugely. He had no reserves left, had to pull units from other areas, even stopped the 1st Armored Division from rotating home to Germany just to get enough troops in his sector. Shows those tough resource allocation dilemmas leaders face.
He talked about feeling chained in place during that first battle. What did he mean?
He felt certain restrictions, rules of engagement perhaps, were holding them back from finishing the fight decisively and quickly. That tension again between strategic directives and the tactical reality on the ground.
Then came the Fallujah Brigade. That was controversial.
Very. The idea was, okay, let's stand up this local Iraqi force to secure the city. Hopeful thinking, maybe.
But risky.
Extremely risky. Big concerns, even within Mattis's command, that it would just be infiltrated by insurgents, old Beathists. He publicly said, we'll make it work, but privately knew it was a gamble.
And that first battle eventually paused with an agreement.
Yeah, they reached a deal with local sheiks, clerics. A pause in military ops in exchange for collecting heavy weapons, giving coalition forces access, letting the Fallujah Brigade patrol, trying to restore services. A temporary fix, really.
After Fallujah won, the insurgency in Anbar province kept evolving. How was that region viewed strategically then?
It was officially a secondary priority, an economy of force zone. Main effort was Baghdad, other places. But Anbar was morphing into something more like a civil war.
And he saw the nature of the fight changing, referencing General Rupert Smith.
Yeah, he recognized it had become what Smith called war amongst the people. Less about traditional battles, more about intelligence, information ops, navigating complex tribal stuff, operating in a totally different cultural landscape. Huge challenge.
And dealing with cultural differences, the media, more challenges.
Absolutely. He mentions disputes over reports of civilian casualties, trying to be transparent but also pushing back against what he saw as inaccurate or biased reporting. He even met with a high-ranking mullah deep inside insurgent territory in Fallujah once. Shows his willingness to engage directly, even in dangerous spots.
Through all this, the constant losses, the complexity, it must have taken a toll. What did he see as his main job?
His primary mission never changed: defeat the enemy. But just as important, do everything possible to keep his own troops alive and safe. He expressed real frustration with policies that restricted tactical action, left enemy safe havens untouched. That disconnect between policy and the front lines.
To cope with this changing warfare, he pushed for new training methods.
He did. He saw the need for better simulators, like the infantry immersion simulator, not just for physical skills, but cognitive ones, instinctive reactions, building those reps safely. And he championed the Combat Hunter program.
Combat hunting.
Yeah, designed to make troops more tactically aware, more cunning, using insights from all kinds of places, detectives, even wildlife trackers. Thinking differently about observation and prediction.
Then came the Second Battle of Fallujah. What did he think about the delay between the first and second fights?
He believed that delay gave the terrorists in Fallujah way too much time to dig in, stockpile weapons, strengthen defenses, and ultimately it meant higher casualties for the coalition when they finally went back in. He also felt key leaders slipped away during that pause.
And there were debates happening within the U.S. military about how to fight this kind of war.
Oh yeah, big debates. Pull back to big bases, or get out amongst the people, engage more, build trust, gather intel. Different schools of thought on counterinsurgency.
He worked with General Petraeus on updating the doctrine for that. What were the key ideas?
A big one was empowering squad leaders, recognizing they were the ones interacting with the population, fighting this dispersed enemy. They also pushed back hard on the idea that amphibious landings were obsolete, pointing to history, even Afghanistan, showing their ongoing value. Audacity throughout the force was key.
He even used informal channels for feedback, right? Like the officers' club.
Yeah, he'd make a point of being at the O Club for happy hour on Fridays. Not just for a drink, but to create a space where people felt more comfortable speaking openly, honestly, outside the formal chain of command, getting the real story.
Then the Haditha incident happened, civilian casualties. Incredibly difficult.
Hugely difficult. He really stresses the immense pressure, the split-second decisions troops face in those chaotic situations. He personally reviewed evidence, walked the scene, grappling with those incredibly tough moral and legal questions.
Shifting focus again, NATO. He had significant roles there too, focusing on alliances. What were his goals?
He deeply understood how vital alliances are for U.S. security. Often underappreciated, he felt, how much the U.S. committed to defending Europe. So his goals were strengthen NATO, get members working together better, and adapt the alliance for new threats.
And defining those new threats was step one.
Yeah, he got all the NATO nations to send their top strategic thinkers together to figure out, okay, what are the challenges now after the Cold War? That led to this big document, Multiple Futures. It helped everyone see the threats similarly and figure out their role.
And he saw Russia becoming a problem again, and the need to handle things like hybrid warfare.
Absolutely. He knew NATO couldn't just stick to its Cold War playbook. Afghanistan, Georgia, those were wake-up calls. NATO needed to adapt to irregular warfare, hybrid threats.
And he wanted European allies to step up more.
He did. He even pushed for France, with its strong military and strategic thinking, to take over a major NATO command, showing trust, encouraging shared leadership.
Then there was his time at Joint Forces Command, JF Chab. He wasn't entirely convinced of its value.
No, he became pretty critical. He questioned what JFCOM actually produced, practically speaking, felt it was largely redundant, could be streamlined. He especially disliked the concept of effects-based operations, EBO.
EBO. What was that?
It was this idea focusing on achieving specific effects, often non-lethal, to reach strategic goals, rather than just traditional combat. Sounds sophisticated, maybe.
What?
But Mattis felt it led to too much centralized control, relied on intelligence that often wasn't perfect, and basically turned commanders into reporters instead of decision makers. He thought it was fundamentally flawed for real-world chaos.
So he tried to change joint doctrine.
He and General Bob Harwood worked hard to cut out what they saw as the wrong-headedness of EBO, pushed for getting back to empowering commanders on the ground, fostering that initiative.
Okay, his final big command, CENTCOM, Head of Central Command, huge responsibility, Middle East, Central Asia. What was his focus there?
Massive area, massive challenges.
Hmm.
His main focus was understand the political end state we want in the region, and then make damn sure all military actions actually support getting there. Strategy connecting means to ends. And again, recognizing allies were absolutely crucial in that complex region.
He even sought advice from Henry Kissinger.
He did. Wanted Kissinger's long view, the historical context, the foreign policy horizon, shows again that constant drive to learn from deep experience, different perspectives.
And he wrestled with that fundamental question about political Islam.
Yeah, openly asking, is the rise of political Islam actually in America's best interest long term? And focusing on building coalitions with nations whose core interests genuinely aligned with the U.S. enduring partnerships.
The demands must have been incredible. How did he manage it all?
Well, empowering his staff was key. He had experienced people, but he stayed engaged, using that mantra. What do I know? Who needs to know? Have I told them? Plus, prioritizing building personal trust with foreign leaders through face-to-face meetings.
He also picked up on concerns about U.S. reliability. Allies worried about the U.S. pulling back.
He heard it directly. Blunt questions from partners. Are you guys going to stick around? Or focus on rebuilding at home and leave us hanging? He reassured them, but acknowledged their concerns were real, given the rhetoric sometimes.
And Iraq and Afghanistan were still major headaches during his time at CENTCOM.
Big time. In Iraq, he disagreed with White House policy on Prime Minister Maliki, argued for a slower, more conditions-based withdrawal. Felt we were leaving too soon.
And Afghanistan.
Grave reservations. Doubted the Afghan forces could hold on after the U.S. surge ended, and crucially pointed to the lack of a clear, achievable political goal and the resources needed to get there. A mismatch between ends and means.
Then the Arab Spring exploded. More complexity. How did he read that?
He saw it as boiling over from deep problems, unemployment, bad governance. He understood the desire for change, but also warned against being too optimistic about smooth transitions, citing history's lessons about revolutions often going sideways.
Guided by that Jefferson quote.
Yeah, Jefferson's pragmatic advice. We have, therefore, only to find out what will be least bad. Sometimes it's about choosing the least bad option when everything's chaotic and information is imperfect.
But even with the turmoil, he maintained strong ties with some nations like the UAE, Little Sparta.
He did. He admired their commitment to fighting terrorism, their willingness to stand with the U.S., even if they didn't agree on everything. Reliable partners.
And his view on Iran remained pretty consistent, a major threat.
Absolutely. He saw the Iranian regime as cunning, hostile, constantly using proxies, destabilizing the region. That view definitely shaped his advice and strategy.
Which brings us to that Iranian bomb plot in D.C., the Cafe Milano plot.
Yeah, that revelation. Iran plotting to bomb a restaurant in Washington, assassinate the Saudi ambassador. He saw that as a blatant act of war, no question.
And he wanted a strong public response, a Zimmerman moment.
Exactly. Like the Zimmerman telegram in WWI. Expose Iran's actions publicly, internationally, galvanize opinion, make it undeniable.
But that didn't happen quite like he proposed.
Now, there were disagreements within the White House on how to handle it. Ultimately, the administration went down the path of secret negotiations, which led to the Iran nuclear deal.
And Mattis's military judgment on that deal.
He called it a poorly calculated long-shot gamble. Pretty clear where he stood based on his assessment of the risks.
Okay, so wrapping up, his final thoughts in the book on leadership, the future, what stands out?
Well, he emphasizes the president's role as commander-in-chief, but also as a sentinel for future generations. The need for a strategy the American people actually support, and one that includes allies. He loves that Truman quote, "Men make history. History doesn't make the man. Agency matters."
And strengthening the international order, not going it alone.
Absolutely crucial for him.
Yeah.
He believes deeply in direct leadership for preparing troops, quotes Aristotle on learning by building courage through practice. It's not just theory.
He comes back to those conditions for decentralized decisions too.
Clear intent from the top, well-trained subordinates who understand that intent. That's the magic formula for initiative and agility.
And having people around you who'll tell you the truth, even when it's hard.
Yes. He valued those truth tellers, the ones not afraid to say, "Boss, I think you're wrong here." That intellectual humility is vital for any leader.
He ends with that powerful line about allies and a big worry about something closer to home.
Yeah, Nations with allies thrive, and those without wither. Strategic advantage, plain and simple. But his biggest fear for America's future, not some external enemy, it's the internal division, the growing polarization within the U.S. itself.
Wow. Okay, so bringing this whole deep dive together, what are the big leadership takeaways that really jump out from Mattis's experience?
I mean, adaptability, right? Continuous learning is huge. Ethical conduct, non-negotiable. Empowering people below you with clear intent and trust. Using history, like really using it. And the absolute strategic need for strong alliances.
It really feels like his leadership was this mix of tough intellectual work, practical skills honed through intense experience, and just a deep grasp of the human side of things.
That sums it up pretty well. And for you, our listener, the learner, think about how these principles might click in your world. Leading a team, managing a project, just trying to be more effective day to day. There are valuable nuggets in his journey for anyone trying to lead better.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. Mattis stressed both deep thinking, that intellectual prep, and decisive action. How do you strike that balance yourself? How do you get informed enough to be confident but not paralyzed by analysis when it's time to actually do something?
It's a great question. And honestly, we've only scratched the surface. We definitely encourage you to check out Call Sign Chaos itself. There's so much more depth and nuance there.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.